So let me welcome Mr. Santosh Desai, who doesn't really need an introduction. He's an author, he's a columnist, he leads a leading company. In the past, he's been head of one of the largest communication conglomerates in India. So let me welcome the thinker, the provocator, Mr. Santosh Desai, to this BW Marketing World, Marketing Whispers. Thank you, Santosh. We do read his column in the Times of India every week, and he simply and deeply brings out the changing thought patterns of the Indian consumers and sometimes says uncomfortable truths that we sometimes don't discuss. So let me start by asking Santosh. Santosh, a lot has happened in the last 7 weeks. A lot has changed. So I'd like to understand from you what has changed when it comes to consumer behaviors, life, how we live, because you cannot separate marketing and consumer behavior from what happens in our life, what happens in the way we work. So give us a sense of what has changed deeply.
Look, I think the last 7 weeks have been very, very significant because, I think there was a certain, if you go back to last year, something totally unexpected, unprecedented, as so many people have said, happened to us. The entire world faced it at the same time. We had a pandemic, the likes of which, none of us in living memory remember. I mean, nobody remembers, the Spanish flu of 1980. I mean, this was a new experience. It was a shock. The lockdown, working from all that, and we discussed it, threadbare. But it did seem that that was behind us. I mean, that's what if you were to look at our mood from the end of last year onwards. I mean, there was a sense that yes, there was a one-time problem, and through millennia, human beings have faced disasters. Catastrophes happen and then they recover, they rebuild their lives. So that's a pattern. Even if it's not a great pattern, we know that pattern. To be something terrible happens, we gradually build back our lives and things return to normal. What this last 7 weeks has done is that it has actually changed that into a one-time fear, a one-time dislocation, into a continuing sense of fear and apprehension. And I think that's a very big shift because the fact that it happened again, and not only did it happen again, but it happened in a much worse way, where there was a sense of helplessness that's felt. We're all the likes of which we haven't seen before. I mean, people who are well connected, people who are affluent. I mean, even those people. I mean, so this is something. You see, the poor in India, the marginalized in India have faced this. This is not a new experience for them. But for a lot of people in the consuming class, this was the first time that they felt so bereft of hope, so alone. And I think that, and the fact that even as we are emerging from it, right now we cannot be sure. There is already talk, and serious talk this time, of preparing for a third wave. And there are some questions about saying vaccination, is it really fully? So there is a sort of a germs that it's not just a germ, it's a whole plethora of germs of doubt that have invaded the consumer consciousness today. And so I think what we are seeing now is on the face of it, the economic, slowdown. On the face of it is the last time around, it felt as if everything had shut down. There was no e-commerce, there was nothing. This time around, it hasn't quite been that. So there is some economic activity that continues, but recovery, I think, is going to be slower. There is always going to be a sense of doubt that it is going to take much longer to get out of that sense of doubt, that sense of uncertainty, which has come because of the fact that this doesn't seem to have a definite ending. Disasters with a definite ending have a shape that you can understand. But disasters with an indefinite ending create a lingering sense of anxiety and doubt, which is not easy to combat.
Absolutely. And for many years, at least the last 10 years, we've been talking of VUCA.
Yeah.
It seemed like a theoretical concept, which in very little measure we encountered. Now, let me talk to you about two other things that are happening. One is the fact that COVID has acted as a chief digital transformation officer, and it has given fillip to e-commerce, which is reflected in the valuation of consumer tech companies. Right. And the stock markets are so exuberant that there is a slew of IPOs coming because right now there is an exuberance on the stock market. Right. So give us a sense of physical retail versus online retail. We know online retail is growing. So is this the end of physical retail as we know it? Or do you think it will be a more hybrid model or, something else?
No, I think there is no question that there is a digital transformation of a huge kind that is taking place. But what I would like to say is that this was a transformation that was already underway. What the pandemic has done is it has to accelerate it, it has amplified it, and it has deepened it. So the speed has gone up, its intensity has gone up, and it has gone into areas that it had earlier where the penetration was still low. Things like education, things like healthcare. Right, areas where digital, the use of digital means was relatively restricted. So I think there is no question. There is a huge shift that has taken place thanks to the pandemic, and this is a shift which is a lot of it is irreversible. So some of it is reversible. I mean, some of the things that we are doing right now are because of the fact that we don't have access to physical
compulsion. Out of compulsion.
The fact that there will still be a lot of grocery kind of purchases that we will go back to a neighborhood retailer, that we will go back. So there are some areas where we will go back, but in a lot of areas, this is irreversible. You are not going to go back to the old way because people who were hesitant earlier about the digital way, they were unfamiliar. The compulsion has forced them to become familiar and comfortable, and today they recognize the value of a digital interface and they're comfortable interacting digitally. The Indian payment ecosystem has been a huge advantage because I think it is a vastly simplified way of transacting. So I think what you have today is clearly it's a sea change that has taken place, and it is a fundamental shift that has happened for digital players. And which is the reason why that explains the stock market exuberance. I must say, the stock market is exuberant for no reason at all, very often. So their exuberance by itself means nothing. So it is impossible to understand sometimes how the stock market continues to be exuberant when the world is tanking. But be that as it may, I think in this particular case, there is reason for exuberance because I think there is genuinely a shift that is in place. What does it mean for physical retail? I think in India, for the next 10 years, any talk of the demise of physical retail is always going to be premature, and it is going to be exaggerated. I mean, physical retail is not going anywhere. See, fundamentally, human beings need places to go to. I mean, at its most core level, the idea, it's great if we get everything sitting where we are, but we still need to go out of home. We need to do things. We need the idea of touching, feeling physical things. In fact, in a sense, the longing for physical experience has been heightened by the fact that we've been confined to home. So while the utilitarian nature of digital commerce will certainly continue to be a very strong factor, there is a certain human need for the physical, as well as the fact that there is familiarity, there is a value to touch, feel, and see in several categories. So I don't think physical retail is going anywhere, but yes, what we are going to see, which we were beginning to see already earlier, is a hybridization take place. Digital will become, over a period of time, will have much more sensory kind of an input. I think people are already talking about the Internet of the Senses, which is the next kind of a digital technological shift. So you will try the richer, more physical-like experiences to the extent possible on digital, you will see, as well as you will see a digital overlay on the physical, so that you get the advantages of digital on physical. I mean, and I think that is the direction in which we will move. But there will be an overall shift, certainly from physical to digital to a certain extent. That I think is something that cannot be denied. That is going to happen.
The more there is digitalization, virtualization, the value of human touch goes up. And I would like to believe those will become premium. Those will be for special occasions. Those will possibly drive higher value. Because I believe anything that has scarcity will have value. At least that's the old thinking. And that is giving rise to sectors like edutech. Look at the rise of edutech. Look at the rise of fintech in terms of, you talk of payments, but in terms of personal investing. These two sectors are exploding. Education, which is a need to skill, reskill, and especially in this pandemic, we need to add new skills. We need to learn new ways of being relevant. And the gig economy that we talked for very long has really kicked in. So tell me, what is the short-term and the medium-term impact on education, on personal investing, on entertainment. Of course, we know that Netflix and OTTs are becoming bigger and bigger. But do you see the cinemas ever coming back into real reckoning? And for example, we know Rohit Shetty is sitting on a film and not releasing the movie because he believes the experience in cinemas will be very different. And he's still waiting for cinemas to fully open. And we saw that The Master came out last year, and in a single, territory in the south, it did 100 crores plus. So clearly, there is some kind of a reverse, experiences, whether it's buying happening because of the push of digital. So give us a sense of what are the trends you see emerging, especially from the last 8 weeks. First time when it happened, we thought maybe it's temporary. Maybe it won't happen again. It is really a black swan. Right. It looks like it's a grey rhino event. It appears more often than once.
No, see, I think as far as let's separate these three: education, fintech, edtech, fintech, and entertainment. So as far as education is concerned, I certainly think that the inroads that have been made are, but it's important to recognize that a lot of the inroads that are going to last are supplementary, are what will augment and supplement the core educational delivery. The core educational delivery is a system, right? It is a system that is an institutionalized system of schools and colleges, which is not easily substitutable. Already there are a lot of people and a lot of students who have, in the initial periods, perhaps woken up to the advantages of digital, but with time there is a certain amount of exhaustion, and there is a certain amount of a sense of this not being an ideal mode of core education delivery. So I think there is, just as there is the excitement of the new, there is also fatigue with the new that you're beginning to see as far as core education goes. A lot of parents with young children are and we've done some sort of testing of the waters here, are absolutely fed up with the digital experience, because it puts a lot of burden on parents. It increases the burden on children.
And the time the children are spending on screens is only going up.
Which is always a technical concern. Yeah. So I think that is out of necessity, and that you are going to see a reversal that will take place to physical modes of imparting education, but there will be an added digital element now. Having utilized some of the interactive and more digital formats, so it is not as if it will go back to being what it was. It will go back to being what it was, plus with an overlay of digital of some kind. So that there is an opportunity there for edtech. But the supplementary digital services, which is what we were traditionally calling tuition, or what is augmenting traditional education, those are the places where edtech will continue to have I think huge opportunities going forward. That's a new kind of that again is irreversible, I think. When it comes to fintech, I think it's important to recognize that we are at the ground floor of change. And fintech and finance is an area where there is the growth is enormous, but the bases are really small currently. Because traditional banking, and when it comes to money, we are an incredibly conservative society. It has taken us years for instruments like mutual funds, to get to even a discernible share. Traditional instruments, traditional modes of transacting, have held sway. So I do think that when it comes to investing, when it comes to transacting, there has been a big change. But when it comes to investing, I think we are going to see very fast levels of growth, but absolute volumes relative to the market are still in the short run going to be small. Only in the medium to long run will we see a significant, share, a significant slice emerge, because I think there are many other issues involved. There are trust issues involved. There is a certain minimum amount of investor education that has to happen before there is confidence in one's own ability to transact in an impersonal kind of a way. So I think there are barriers yet, although I think the outlook is extremely powerful, it's strong. Entertainment, I think it's interesting that at one level, digital the fact is dominant modes of entertainment today are virtual. They are digital, they are not physical. So there is no question about that. Which is the reason why I will go back to what you said to a certain extent. What you said is that there is the premium experience, for the physical. The fact that there is a larger than life experience, that there is scale involved, that the pleasures of entertainment are multi-sensorial in the sense that you go out with a family, you eat, it is therefore the nature of entertainment rather than just cinema that I think is the wraparound nature of physical entertainment experiences. And I think in a larger sense, I think whether it is shopping, whether it is anything tomorrow, if the physical experience has to continue, there must be a wraparound of entertainment. The strongest calling card of the physical experience is the fact that it can provide a multi-sensorial, multi-constituency sort of a sense of entertainment, which it's not easy for us. Digital is a personal medium. It is therefore, while it is social in terms of the fact that you connect with many people, it's all virtual. The physicality of a group experience, of a social experience, I think is something that is physical's strongest point. And the more that is exploited and the more that is used, I think that the better the chance for physical experience to continue to do it.
So, Mr. Desai, one of the changes during the crisis was in consumer buying behavior patterns. A recent McKinsey study indicated that majority of consumers in India intend to continue with these changes even in the next normal. So, a direct fallout of this has been on the shock of loyalty. Would you agree with the statement that brand loyalty is under peril at the moment?
Well, yes, I think that it's not a simple yes/no answer. I think the brand loyalty as a concept, needs to be looked at in several ways. At one level, yes, when you have a new unfamiliar situation, when you have scarcity, you have two kind of reactions. One is to go back to the familiar. So in some senses, you have greater brand loyalty. So ideally, you would like, when you are worried about hygiene, to go back to brands like Dettol and Savlon, even for things like, for all kinds of sanitizers, etc. So at the first level, there is a return to the familiar and the comfort of the familiar. On the other hand, because you are trying out new things in a new way, you're transacting digitally, which is a new experience for a fair number of people in India. Your openness to new modes of buying as well as to new brands increases. So the idea of brand loyalty decreases. So it's not just one way. I mean, there are some categories and where brand loyalty increases. There are some category where it decreases. But I want to make a larger point. I think in a larger sense, I am surprised that marketers continue to use these words, brand loyalty. This is an outdated or rapidly becoming an outdated idea. Loyalty is a feudal word. Loyalty says that you will continue to come to me regardless of what I do. This is my Jagir. You are my loyal subjects and you will continue to patronize me simply because you got used to me. I think this passive idea that consumers will keep coming to us simply because they came to us in the past, I think is a very dangerous idea. Because I think it places responsibility on consumers and not on the marketer. And I think a better way to talk about it is brand belief. Do consumers believe in the brand? Because belief must have a reason. Belief must be supported by the actions of the brand. Loyalty is a passive idea. Belief is an active idea. And I do believe that there are, even in this time, there are brands that will elicit belief, where they will say, I believe in this. That's why I'll keep going back. Not because I am not excited by the new, but because I believe that this is the better option. So I think it is very important to reorient how we think and bury this idea of brand loyalty for all time to come, because it keeps surfacing. And I find it surprising that in today's day and age, and I know you're quoting a McKinsey study, which uses the idea of software. And I'm surprised that someone like McKinsey would continue to use an idea which, to my mind, should not be part of the marketing lexicon today. I agree with both those articulations. I think both of them are tackling the problem with the way brand loyalty is, because they are acknowledging the fact that it is your consumers that and also the other question I always ask for brand loyalty is, are brands loyal to consumers? Why is loyalty a one-way thing? Brands are not loyal to consumers. Banks today say we don't want you to come to us because it is not it is too expensive for us to service people at our outlets. So if brands are not loyal to consumers, why on earth should we expect consumers to be loyal to brands?
So, sir, in the same study, it was also identified that the top 3 priorities for consumers in India was value, quality, and purpose-driven, especially when they were considering new choices or some form of experimenting. So, is this in line with your own expectations and observations? What is the opportunity for brands here?
I think certainly it is true that value in India has always been a very important thing. I think the definition of value has changed a little with time. If earlier the value connotation was what I would call a denominator-based idea, which is the fact that how I want to pay the least. What is the least that I can get away by paying for? So, the days of the Bata pricing to be not 100, 99, that kind of a mindset. Then I think the idea of value has become numerator driven, saying how much more can I get for the same price? So, which is the reason why you have buy one, get one free. You have the offers which are loaded, right? Which are giving you more for less. But the more is important, not so. Yes, value continues to be important, even if the meaning of value is shifting a little. Quality, I think, increasingly in India, from a time when it was not, quality is becoming important. You are looking for not just getting access to a category, but what are you getting? Because I think the consumer has got used enough to consumption across the board for you to want quality. Purpose, I think, is I would say that it is an emerging and important sort of an area, but is not. It would not be in my top three. The sense of newness and novelty would be in my top three, because I think for the fact that India is still relatively young consumption market, we are still excited by new ideas. The idea of purpose is a post-consumption idea. It is where in societies where there has been a surfeit of consumption, there is too much consumption. Then post-consumption, you start feeling a sense of guilt. You start feeling a sense of responsibility. You start asking yourself questions that, do I have too much? Is this consumption meaningful? It is beginning to happen in India. There are segments in India where it is happening. But in an overall sense, I would not characterize that a purpose as being one of the top three today. Maybe in 10 years' time, maybe in 5 years' time, it will be. It will probably be. But right now, I would say my third would be something like a sense of newness, an excitement with consumption rather than a boredom with consumption.
Very right, sir. So marketeers are facing an at-home consumer. So 2021 threatens to predominantly continue this. What are some lessons of last year that are applicable even in the current time?
No, I think see, some of the things we've already spoken of, when we talk about digital, because I think one of the clear, when you are at home, there are a couple of things that are important. One is, the fact that you have continued access to things that you want access. So access becomes very important. And because, what you took for granted in a pre-pandemic world, that, you could just go and buy anything you wanted and you would have access to anything you needed. The question was, what did you want? But in a post-pandemic world, in a pandemic world, you can't take access for granted. So I think that continues to be important. If anything is suddenly not available, for instance, when in these 7-8 weeks when medicines were not available, somebody, heavy duty medicines that were not available, but even routine cough medicines, because everyone was falling ill, were not available. Right. Then you realize the power of access, the fact that you are able to get what you want. And I think that continues to be important. The other thing that is important when you are stuck at home is ironically our diversions. Which is the reason why you will find that the more you are able to sort of create new forms of engagement and diversion, because you are stuck. You don't have a diversity of experiences. So you need to stimulate a diversity of experiences through digital means. And so I think that is the other thing that people are looking for, and that is important. And also I think recognizing the fact that people who are, say, new to digital have now had a full years of experience of digital. They are beginning to move from a very rudimentary kind of an interaction with digital to a more sort of an evolved interaction. And it's important, therefore, earlier you were only creating a market access to digital. Now it is possible even to build brand stories and brand narratives to digital for a wider audience. And so perhaps that is the other opportunity to take note of.
Health and immunity and well-being has taken a new priority.
Right.
It has become a very important driver for individuals, for organizations, for brands, if I may put it like this.
Yep.
Now tell us, how will this health and immunity and well-being focused behavior last? Because human beings are very, very, hedonistic, if I have to use any other word. And sometimes after a shock, they can go back to their old behaviors. Do you see this new interest in health, well-being, immunity lasting longer and becoming something which becomes ingrained in the way we think, act, live our lives?
Yeah. So I'll just take one step back and then answer this question. I think one of the ways of looking at, this pandemic and what are because there are a lot of things have changed. Now, when you ask the question, what will remain and what will go back to the way it was? I think one principle to use, I think, is the fact that things that were already beginning to change before the pandemic, perhaps at a low key, are the kind of things. So which means that, there were already organic shifts that were beginning to take place because they were drawing from a lot of forces of society, but at a somewhat low level of intensity. What the pandemic has done is it has raised the level of intensity, but it has not invented new trends. So for instance, the digital trend was already happening. It has not invented it. The preventive health, being more conscious about wellness discourse was already happening. People were already doing all kinds of funny diets. They were already taking, much more looking at food in a much more critical way. There were already superfoods that were available. We were already talking about the importance of millets. So some of those things were already happening. The reason why I believe that will continue, therefore, is because it is a longer term. It is not just happened. If it had happened only because, that's why I believe that core education will go back to being what it was, because that is not a longer term.
The life skills that come by being on the campus, you cannot learn.
Yeah, and that you are not going to substitute. And also there was no long-term trend. There was nothing. People were not moving away from campuses, Yeah. But but people were starting to digital, to financially transact on the internet. So I think where there was a trend, and the trend has become much more stronger, those trends will continue and are much more likely to continue. So I do believe that this immunity, health, this trend will continue. But the other thing I also want to say, to the point that you were making, Anurag, is that the one way to, one almost as a principle is the fact that if one trend is a dominant trend, you can bet that there is a counter trend which is exactly the opposite. That will simultaneously exist. So if there is movement...
So it's not either or.
It is not either or.
India is not an either or country. We're an and country.
But it will always be both. It will always be both. And I think in India, on this, there will be a bunch of people who will be much more careful, who will think of immunity. There will be other people who will be hedonistic, saying, what the hell, agar marna hi hai, to meaning uske pehle, let's have a war. Or people who have been scooped up for such a long time will want a release. And we saw that. We saw that last year. We saw how quickly we went back to crowds and to, and to shops and markets. And, it was, so it didn't take us that much time to get back to it. So I think both are true. There is a long-term movement towards preventive health care, and there will also be a movement towards, enjoying ourselves and pleasurable experiences.
A lot of organizations have started to take their purpose much more seriously. And I'm talking of, very large corporations. So give us a sense of what are the implications of change behaviors of consumers. And consumers are also your office colleagues. They're also your investors. They're also your friends. What are its implications for leaders?
Look, I think the biggest implication, and the one that I'd like to focus on, is the fact that we have been forced to integrate work with life. Right? We always talk about the work-life balance in the past, and it's a phrase that has always perplexed me, because it seems to suggest that work is outside life. Work is a domain which is somehow protected from life, and life is the rest of your life. So there is work versus life, which seems to me to be a ridiculous idea. But I think what this pandemic has done is that it has forced us to acknowledge the fact that we have one seamless life, and work is a part of it. When we work from home, what we are actually doing, when you have a large organization where all the employees are working from home, you have employees that are plugged into their lives first, and work is a part of it. This is a fundamental shift that if as leaders, we do not acknowledge the fact that people have experienced the fullness of their lives, often for the first time, because, they are, for the first time, they have integrated all elements of their life, and they have lived their life, day to day, in a way that where the component parts of it, you don't dress up differently to go to work. You don't behave differently, so otherwise we have, without knowing it,
earlier it was compartmentalized. Now it's come together.
They have come together. See, we have lived two different lives. We were different people. We had a different title. Therefore, we were different at work. We dressed differently. We spoke differently. It is as if there was a different person there. And then we came back home and we became somebody else. Now that hasn't gone completely, because on Zoom we still have to behave ourselves a little bit. But it has given us so many more degrees of freedom. With this, what happens is that when you go back, for employers to continue to believe that they have the primary share of the employee's life, and they can make demands on the employee's life without considering what they want. The reason why purpose is important. One is it is linked to consumers, but a very important reason why purpose is coming is because it's linked to your employees. Because the employees of today want not just material growth in their jobs. They want, that's the younger generation's ambitions are horizontal as well as vertical. My generation had vertical ambitions. Okay, you join a company, you grow every 3 years, you get a promotion every 2 years, you get designations, you get a better car, you get a better office, you get more money. It's all vertical, right? Yeah, it's all, and they're all very well defined. Corner office, international trips, fly business class, very well defined rungs of growth, which are all vertical. Today's generation has horizontal needs. You look at an Instagram profile, people describe, nobody is just a banker. Nobody is just an advertising person. Nobody, is just a reporter. They are reporter, but they are foodies. They are, travel enthusiasts. Everyone's ambitions are horizontal. Work is one of those things, right? Now, if as leaders, what has to be figured out is how do you harness this instead of fighting? There is one narrative which is to
how do you create the ikigai?
How do you exactly?
Where all these come together.
Yes, and they become part of the strength of organizations rather than being seen as a leakage from the organization. I think the biggest challenge for leaders is to encounter this new reality about the people that they work with and how to harness this.
So the consumer sentiment is sure fluctuating once again. What have been your experiences in the last 2 months, and what kind of advices did you have for your teams at the while you were juggling between this?
No, it's obviously we spoke right at the beginning. The last few weeks have been really traumatic, and have changed the way consumers have looked at the world and have looked at themselves. And it's not just consumers. We are much more than consumers, right? We are consumers in a small part of our life. We are brothers and sisters and friends, in a much larger part of our life. And that is what I think we were all very anxious, and everybody was very anxious, very, so I think the most important thing here is that you go back to what your real priorities are. I think that's the most important thing at a time like this. At a time like this, choosing between one brand of clothes versus the other does not seem very important, right? You have far bigger kind of issues to confront. So I think one of the things that has happened is the fact that there is a recognition of what the real priorities in life are, and I think it's important for everybody to acknowledge that. And I think that has been a big learning, I think, in this area, in this period.
We know the budgets for shoots have already come down. We know agencies are trying to become consulting companies. Agencies are trying to become technology platforms or technology advisors. Give us a sense of what do you see happening to the traditional agency ecosystem?
Look, as of now, I share what is a larger pessimism that I think most industry, not just watchers, but people in the industry seem to have about the agency model. But this is a pessimism that I think people have had over the years. But and I'll tell you why. I think one of the things where the agency business has missed a trick is that this is the one business that has no conception of investment. It does not understand the notion of investment. What I mean by this is that, the agency business creates IP. It creates intellectual property. Its entire work is about creating, intellectual property. And yet it has no ownership of that intellectual property. To me, this is the idea of this obsession with being a service provider rather than an IP owner or an investor. I mean, the role that, say, a lot of VCs have played, I do not understand why the advertising business, with a little amount of readiness to invest, could not have played by investing in startup brands, by providing them with creative work and owning, a share of the IP, if not the entire IP of it. why was, because without a model that is self-sustaining, which is not dependent on your, starting from zero every single time, which is the agency business starts from zero every quarter, right? Barring a small percentage of retainer business that people would have, you are forever a project-based business with very short-term relationships, with price wars taking place, is a recipe for disaster, because it's a race to the bottom. Now, if you do not create adequate kind of a self-sustaining kind of revenue of a certain kind, the agency business is doomed. And that is my worry. My worry is the fact that if you will continue to move down the value chain. And the other problem is the fact that advertising overall, given digital, has, the old days where, your mass media campaign and the creative storytelling of a certain kind had the kind of, it created popular culture. It was, which is the last campaign that has created popular culture in India, which is part of popular culture. Which is the last advertising campaign that you can remember and say, bacha wo, will be able to, tell you usme kya hota hai. Because there isn't a medium that today, it's so fragmented that you don't have that opportunity. So I do think that the business is in peril, both in terms of the fact that there are, headwinds in terms of just the value of the core work that was traditionally done by the agency. Agencies have reinvented themselves, certainly, that has helped. But the fundamental problem of the business model, that you are a service provider with zero entry barriers in the business, and where your price points are being pushed lower and lower and lower. I think that problem is not being tackled.
You've written about the relationship human beings and individuals have with God, that we are not visiting temples, we are not going to religious places. Hence, that fundamentally that relationship gets strengthened, but it changes. Give a sense that for a lot of us, the belief in our religious rituals, belief in going to a temple, a gurdwara, a mosque, of going to a church, in some way defines our relationship with God. Give us a sense of where we are headed with that.
I think India has been a deeply religious country and will continue to be so. I think the temple and all places of worship have been much more than merely places of worship. In fact, they have been community sort of places of community gathering. In fact, strangely, we have found in small town India, there are also places where young boys and girls meet, because that is the one place they can meet without fear of social sanction. So they are actually multi-purpose. They're part of our lives, right? They have been part of our social lives of Indians. And I don't think that is changing anytime soon. Their mobilization for political purposes is a relatively new phenomenon. But it's not just the temples. I think it's the overall, it is religious identity that is being mobilized. It is not so much, I think the temple visit and the culture around the temple has not changed. My sense is that, the relationship with God is much deeper and is unlikely to get displaced by 7 weeks of a different behavior. I do believe that religiosity runs deep. I don't think it is akin to a habit that gets, because I think it comes from, that relationship comes from places of belief, it comes from faith, but it also comes from fear. It comes particularly at a time when you realize how fragile human life is, how insignificant you are as an individual. So if at one level you have not gone and visited places of worship because of compulsions, on the other hand, you have felt that need for belief in something larger than yourself even more, because of the kind of the absolute sense of despair that has surrounded you. So I think human beings become more religious in times of crisis. They don't become less religious. If you look at historical kind of, all evidence seems to suggest that you don't turn around and say, one person could say, if God exists, then why is there so much misery? But the human reaction normally is the opposite, which is to saying, I need the reassurance of a higher power to help me at a time like this. So I suspect that dislocation is likely to be temporary and not permanent.
Okay. And what do you think of the very high valuations of consumer internet brands? You yourself help build brands, you build a brand portfolio in your current responsibility. You've seen, challenger brands knocking off some very large incumbents. you've seen Indian brands, you've seen MNC brands. So what do you think of this very large valuation of consumer internet brands?
Look, I mean, along with a lot of people, I don't understand the valuations because they don't make sense to me. And I don't say this, I understand the fact that there is a vote for the future, but what has happened is that this has become a structure of its own, because there are and it is perhaps I don't want to sort of over exaggerate the ludicrousness of it, but I do think that there are a lot of valuations that using any metrics will not make sense, because eventually, see, right now what is happening that it becomes a Ponzi scheme of a kind, and I use those words with maybe in inverted commas, but it is because it is what is important is only what I can do with the next 3 years. Is there going to be somebody who's willing to buy it off me? Is the horizon, rather than is this a lasting business that will give returns over a period of time. So the old models of valuation, which is that a discounted sort of flow over infinity. What is the present value of that? I mean, or whatever was the old way of thinking of valuation has gone out of the window. And what you are now looking at is really a sense of saying what is the next, who is the next investor, and what valuation is that person willing to come in at. Fundamentally, I think it's a non-sustainable system, and it is a system that at some stage will collapse. But in the meantime, relative value, I can understand. I can understand the fact that these are valuable businesses, I understand. But the actual value that is being accorded to them is what I'm mystified by. Okay? So it's not so much the fact that there is value in those businesses. They will do well. But at this valuation, I don't.
2 weeks back, a leading conglomerate in India for its FMCG business hired a venerable executive from a very venerable company. And the next day, the stock shot up by 21%. The market cap went up to a number which created tremendous value. And this happened in the last 5 years with multiple businesses where professional management of a certain kind has unlocked value. I mean, I'm talking of Mr. Sitapati leaving Levers and joining Godrej Consumer.
Right.
And, overnight, the business value grew by 21% in terms of market capitalization. Now, clearly, the business existed all along, but it's the faith in the fact that the business will get up even better in the future. So, give us a sense of what is your view on these things.
Look, I think the stock market is a hair trigger mechanism, right? So what it does is that it can respond, so its intent gets magnified, and its reading gets magnified in its response. So when it is, hesitant about something, you can dive, which and if it is bullish about something, you can see this kind of a spike. Typically, these spikes don't sustain. Typically, you will see that as a momentary exuberance. It is a signal rather than an enduring kind of vote of confidence. But I do think that it's important. But it also acknowledges the reality. I mean, I do think that a good, strong management at the top does make a difference. So in that sense, the stock markets are acknowledging the reality, but perhaps over amplifying it, which is what stock markets do. I mean, and so I mean that is not by itself surprising. But I do think, but I at the same time I will say this, that there is also a tendency to overvalue individuals and without any specific kind of a nod to the individuals involved. But I think in general what happens is that if you look at the history of corporations, you will find that this and I think this is an American kind of an overhang where the top executives are, disproportionately rewarded and disproportionately credited. Businesses and brands, if we at one level are saying brands are built over the years, they are actually what the faith consumers have in us. And if a brand's business then places so much importance on individuals, fundamentally something doesn't, sit together. Because either the brand is a consequence of the work that you have done over decades in the kind of confidence consumers have in you, and that is the business performance is a consequence of that, or it is a consequence of the brilliance of an individual or two. So I do think that sometimes stock markets do also tend to over amplify the role of individuals.
Fantastic. Back to you, Soumya.
So we can perhaps, end with some overall advice on the areas that will become important in engaging the consumers in the coming year. We do have many brand managers and agency executives listening to us right now. So this could serve as some advice we can apply to their everyday decision making.
Is how do you read change? How do you make sense of change? So when big change happens, what are some of the principles of looking at change? And I think the one or two things that I would like to say, one, I've already said this to some extent, which is that change is never linear and it is never unidirectional. So, if change will move simultaneously certainly in the opposite directions, and it will move in more than one direction. And it's very important because opportunities will, so if trends move in a certain direction, certainly there will be opportunities there, but look in the opposite direction because there will also be opportunities. Because if at one level we are going to be much more worried about health, at another level we are going to say to hell with it, let's enjoy our life. If at one level we are going to say, we have far too much, when we have, like I'm wearing a shirt after a long time, right? I've been living off t-shirts, 3 t-shirts, 4 t-shirts, and it's like everybody else, right? Why do you need so many clothes? I open my wardrobe and I say, what? I was nuts or what? Why do I have so many shirts? Why do I have so many clothes? So at one level, post-pandemic, there is going to be a turn towards frugality. We're going to turn around and say, do I need this much? At another level, we'll be dying to wear clothes, apart from t-shirts, right? So both these are true. So change is not simplistic. Change will always work in complex ways in every category. So the question to be asked is that, because we tend to look at dominant trends, what are the trends of tomorrow? And therefore you will all, and everybody will then go after that one trend. What is important is to look at several trends and certainly a counter trend. So that's one. The other thing to look at in terms of change is that change is a system, right? And change cascades. So the really interesting opportunities will not be the first order opportunities, but they'll be the second order. If this changes, what else will change? Right. So if, for instance, we want fewer clothes, what happens to the clothes we wear? Is there an opportunity for a used fashion, a recycled fashion business? That is a second order opportunity. So I think if you're looking at opportunities that come out of one-off events like the pandemic, it's very important to look at not just first order opportunities, but to look at second order opportunities. And to look at how, if this changes, what else will change? Right. And to look at cross category. If fashion changes, does travel change? If travel changes, does entertainment change? If entertainment changes, what does it mean for shopping? It is in the interrelationships between categories that I think opportunity lies. So I think what is important, apart from the specifics of the changes that we spoke about, is to think about change differently. Because I think lots of opportunities, any moment of change is a moment of opportunity. Because the old order is being redefined, new behaviors are coming in, and it is in spending a lot of time thinking about change that I think new growth avenues will emerge. And I think I would urge, therefore, businesses to think much more about change in a firstly in a conceptual way, and then the practical implications of thinking about change in that way.
So tell us. Are marketers, in your view, really becoming more and more data-driven, or there is a long way to go there?
So they certainly are more data-driven than they were earlier. But also, I think the advantage, certainly in digital, is the fact that the responsibility for being data-driven is often taken away by the platforms that you use. So there is a lot of use of data, much greater use of data than in the past. There's no question about the fact that there's much greater use of data, because the targeting is data-driven. Increasingly. So, and the apportionment of investment is data. So I think there is a much more direct use of data today than there has been in the past. But data to generate big insights, data that will drive the sort of what is the next growth sort of a vector for a company. That kind of data use is still limited, because I think that kind of data use requires, again, so it's not just looking at one piece of data, it's actually synthesizing data from across different areas. And so that interplay between what data gives you, what qualitative insight gives you, I think the synthesis is something where I think much more work needs to be done. Because I think that's a very exciting opportunity. When you have this much data, how do you take the data out of its narrow use in terms of targeting, in terms of investment, and have a much larger, a much more kind of a big picture kind of a use of that data. I think that is something that perhaps we could do much better.
Really, what's your message of hope? Of course, we keep saying this shall too pass, and hopefully vaccination is an answer. Hopefully the change behavior in terms of wearing the mask properly, sanitization and distancing, at least for the foreseeable future, is the answer. Not having large crowds is the answer. Having virtual events is the answer. Minimizing when you step out is the answer. But in some way, that's not the free spirit human beings are known for. So give us your last message, which can hopefully show us some hope and deal with the anxiety that all of us have. And Adam Grant came up, he wrote a beautiful article 3 weeks back, and he called it Languishing. And he wrote his new book also on the same. And there is a feeling of being languishing. So how do we deal with it?
It's I think it's a question everyone as an individual is grappling with, and nobody has magic answers. But I do think that there are two parts to this. At least the way I look at it, and the way I try to look at the positive side of things. One is the rational side, which is to say, yes, actually vaccination is happening. And those of us who have been through COVID have some added immunity. Those of us, who have been now know what they have to do much better than they did in the past. So I think there is a rational side to this. I think even in terms of the terrible situation we went through last 7 weeks, I think everybody has woken up. The government has woken up, the infrastructure, medical infrastructure has woken up, everybody has woken up. And I think we are much better equipped to handle things than we were earlier. So there's a rational side to hope. There is concrete reason for hope. There is a scientific reason for hope. And I think that's important. And the other side of it is, I think, we have realized that, yes, we have lost a lot along the way, but we've been through the worst. And we have the ability to go through it, and that there is a resilience of the human spirit, which I think we have all experienced ourselves, not just in others. It's not something that we have to read about. It's something that we've seen. It's something that we've all gone through. So I do think that personally, my own sense and a realistic assessment is that even if there were a third wave, I think the worst is behind us. I do think that the worst is behind us. I do think that now we are looking at, I think for us to accept that is important, because it's going to take us some time to accept the fact that the worst is behind us. But I think personally, I'm not an optimist when it came to the pandemic, but I do genuinely believe that given vaccination and given where we are at, I think I don't think we will. I think we have passed the worst, and I think as we open out and as we rediscover the joys of meeting people, gradually opening out, I think automatically a lot of healing will take place. Just as I think we should not underestimate the human ability to heal, and I think we will all heal, and we will all be in a better place certainly the next time we have an opportunity to chat.
Thank you, Santosh. On that optimistic note, I always believe that tomorrow will be better than today. I always believe there's something positive in whatever is happening, and I think it has made us more human. It has made us more authentic, and the sense of immediacy on the purpose on why we exist has become real. And we started to ask ourselves, what is really important? Action doesn't mean progress. What is the progress spiritually, emotionally, in our work sphere? What is the impact we are making? And if I may say, Santosh, I think in the last 7 weeks, to a lot of people, including me, there was the insignificance of what I do. I mean, I thought it was not good enough. I couldn't save a colleague's life. There was an insignificance of what we did. There was a willingness to help. We did whatever we could, but clearly, there was an insignificance. But at the same time, realizing that every act of kindness that we do matters, even in that insignificant sense. So thank you, Santosh. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Clearly, you were able to bring out thoughts that will help our viewers and readers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you so much.